There are going to be two questions that I think really define leading with courage. And I'm going to talk now about the first question, and in 20 minutes or so we'll get to the second question. But the first question is, what is my duty? And duty is really kind of an old-fashioned word. I mean, I don't hear a lot of that. In leadership today, sadly, I think there are a lot of leaders where the kinds of questions you hear they might be asking themselves is more like, what's in it for me? What can I get out of the situation? Things like that. But duty is a word that really arises especially with officers. The word officer is really important. When you're an officer, you take an oath of office, and you have a fiduciary responsibility. Fiduciary means that you've been given trust. Your organization has given you trust, and the public has given you trust. And one of the implications is that it's really not just about you. Your oath of office and you're taking a position of leadership means you're really getting to something bigger than yourself. And I asked you all, I distributed a survey before the conference, and many of you were kind enough to respond. And I asked in the survey, well, what were your personal motivations for becoming an officer? I mean, most of you are officers, I think. And I heard a lot of different answers, both on the side of contributing and making a difference, also showcasing my abilities. I have a passion to lead my peers, better myself, better the chapter. So you can see there's a mix here of people saying that, you know, I want to be a leader for those healthy, self-interested reasons, for my personal growth and development, and also for the benefit of the community. And I was interested to learn about your fraternity that this is very consistent with the values and priorities that your organization lays out, that one of the kind of mottos or slogans is a fraternity above yourself. And in fact, you're in kind of an unusual fraternity because your fraternity says there's actually even a higher value. And this is pretty old school. This is what, you know, fraternities were really started as societies to promote scholarship and community service. And so, as officers, you have taken on this duty to really put your fraternity's interests ahead of your own, and also to put scholarship ahead of all other values. So that's a pretty remarkable tribute, I think, to the way your organization has set you up to be mission-driven. And sometimes that's going to mean personal sacrifice. Sometimes that's going to mean financial sacrifice, things you're going to pay for out of your pocket, or time you're going to spend that's going to distract from other self-interested pursuits. But you're going to experience the joy, the rapture, really, of being part of something larger than yourself, of being mission-driven. It's an unbelievable feeling that you'll have for the rest of your life, and once you've had it, you will keep seeking that out. I know you will. So it's incredible preparation, as Jim was saying earlier, for, you know, going out into the world of the professions and being an officer. You will be, having been an officer in your fraternity, you will end up being an officer in a nonprofit corporation or a for-profit corporation. You may be an officer of the court, a judge or a lawyer. You may be somebody who's involved in engineering and has professional responsibilities for the safety of the public. You may end up being in medicine or in aviation. I'm using these, you may be an officer on a boat. I'm using all these examples to say, really, that's what officers have in common, is this fiduciary responsibility. And I want to use aviation as an example. I don't know if you remember, I'm going to spend a couple minutes on this case study. I don't know if you remember a few years ago, an airplane took off from LaGuardia Airport, and within a couple minutes, the airplane hit birds. And it's not unusual to hit birds, but in this case, it was huge Canada geese migrating, and they hit both engines and took both engines out, and that's extremely rare. And the captain and the crew had the presence of mind to glide that plane down and land in the Hudson River, and there were no fatalities. So this became known as the miracle on the Hudson. And here's a picture of the people who, after the landing, were gathered on the wing and on lifeboats, and were picked up very quickly by ferries. So I want to share this case study to really illustrate. We're going to spend a little bit of time with this story because we're going to draw out some real lessons that I think if you hang with me, you'll find are really applicable to your leadership. And the first thing I want to do is share the recording from the cockpit and the tower transmissions. And this recording, this is the real recording, and it may be a little hard to hear some of the exact wording, but the first thing I want you to pay attention to is not the details of the exact words, but what leadership sounds like in a crisis and an emergency. And then afterwards, we're going to go through some transcripts and we're going to spend a little more detail. But first, let's just listen to visual here is a simulation, but the audio is real.
Cactus 15.9, departure to contact line, maintain 15,000.
U.S. Airways had merged with U.S. West.
Cactus 1549.
So they're called Cactus. That's their handle.
Cactus 15.9, turn left lane 270.
This is Cactus 1539. Hit birds through lost thrust on both engines, returning back towards LaGuardia.
Okay, you need to return to LaGuardia. Turn left heading up 220.
220.
Tower, stop your departures. Got emergency returning. It's 1529. He bird strike. He lost all engine. He lost the thrust in the engines. He's returning immediately.
Cactus 1529. Which engines?
He lost thrust in both engines. He said.
Got it.
Cactus 1529. We can get it for you. Do you want to try to land 1013?
We're unable. We may end up in the Hudson.
All right, Cactus 15.9. It's going to be left traffic to runway 31.
Unable.
Okay, what do you need to land? Do you want to try to go to Teterboro?
Yes.
Teterboro, Empire, actually LaGuardia departure guy, emergency inbound.
Hey, got
Cactus 1529 over the George Washington Bridge, wants to go to the airport right now.
wants to go to airport. Check. Does he need assistance?
Yes, it was a bird strike. Can I get him in for runway 1?
Runway 1, that's good.
Cactus 1529, turn right 280, you can land runway 1 at Teterboro.
We can't do it.
Okay, which runway would you like at Teterboro?
We're going to be in the Hudson.
I'm sorry, say again, Cactus? Cactus 15.9, radar contact is lost. You also got Newark Airport up at 2 o'clock in about 7 miles. Eagle 5, 4718, turn left heading 210.
210, 4718. I think he said he was going in the Hudson.
Cactus 15.9, you saw him?
That's pretty heavy. That's what leadership sounds like. I mean, I don't know what your reactions were, but I just can't believe everyone's so cool, calm, and collected in the heat of an emergency that takes place. The whole thing takes place over 3 minutes. And we were just hearing the cockpit to tower transmissions, because what's really going on is that there's a whole scene playing out in the cockpit. But one of the things that really impressed me about this story was not just what happened in terms of landing the plane safely, because there were no fatalities, but it's also what happened right afterwards. The captain has just been through, and the co-pilot and the crew, but they've just been through the most harrowing 3 minutes of their lives. Of course, the passengers have too, but the crew safely evacuates everyone onto the wings and into the lifeboats. And then the captain is assured and told everyone is off the plane, but he doesn't just take that, he doesn't take the crew's word for it. He goes through the cabin. The cabin is filling up with water. The strike, the back of the plane, ruptured, and the plane is filling up with water from the back, and it's sinking with the back down. And the captain walks through the cabin twice to assure that everyone is really off the plane. So when you talk about putting your duty, the call of duty, ahead of your self-interest, clearly at a certain point the healthy self-interest is get off the plane. But the captain goes through twice, and I think the reason he did this is because of an accident a few years ago in France when an Airbus that was on a demonstration flight crash landed in the trees. And again, it appeared that everyone had survived, and they'd gotten everyone out of the, they went off the rafts, like into the treetops, and people were okay. But it turned out, then the cabin, in that case, actually exploded and everything went up in flames. But it turned out that they had left, unknowing to everyone, a paraplegic boy who couldn't get off the plane, and a young girl who was trapped and strapped in and couldn't get out, and a lady who apparently had seen them and was trying to rescue them. And so that incident, the thing about aviation, and I hope many other industries, but aviation is particularly good about this, is that they learn from the past. And the checklists that they use and the procedures and the lessons that they apply come from the cumulative wisdom of test pilots and prior tragedies. And so that's obviously a clear analogy to the importance of your role in your fraternity and to the importance of your support team, both whether it's in the national organization or on your campus. So I want to take a few minutes and look at some other features of this incident that really illustrate things that we can all learn from and take away in our capacities on campus as leaders. And so the first thing to notice about this transcript is there's a lot going on an airplane. There's the PA announcement to the cabin, right? And this is the captain explaining that they're cleared for takeoff. And then Hot 1 and Hot 2 are the helmet sort of earphones that the pilot and co-pilot are using to communicate. Hot 1 is the captain and Hot 2 is the co-pilot. And so the aviation industry is very good about having checklists for everything. So at every stage of a procedure, takeoff and landing and in-flight, at every stage there's a checklist. And they don't ever take it for granted. You use the checklist every single time. So in this case, they're going through and they talk about the fuel. We need 19,000 pounds. We got 21.8. And there's a verbal check back to make sure. And some of you who, I don't know, have maybe enjoyed rock climbing, you know that this is true also in other areas, that in rock climbing you're being belayed by someone and they say belay on. You say on belay. And they say climbing and you say climb on. There's a check back so that you know that you're on the same page, literally, even verbally. And so the co-pilot says that the taxi checklist is complete. And then they take off, and look at the time here. It's 3:26 and 54 seconds. Flaps up after takeoff checklist complete. So they had the taxi checklist. Now they have the after taxi checklist. And the pilot says birds. And there's expletive deleted. The incident occurs at 3:27 and 11 seconds. And immediately the captain sees we got both of the engines rolling back, so the instruments all work. And then the next thing to notice is there's a chain of command, right? The co-pilot has actually taken off. But when the emergency is declared and the incident is obvious, within, what do we say, it was 3:27:11, within 10 seconds, the captain says, my aircraft, and then there's the verbal check back, your aircraft. And at 3:27:28, so this is 18 seconds into the incident, the captain does something kind of amazing and says, get the quick reference handbook. Loss of thrust on both engines. Now, this crew was an extremely experienced crew that had been through training, decades of flying, simulations, and at the same time, they knew that in an emergency, the emotions and the drama can interfere. At this point, there's chimes and bells and everything going off, lots of distractions. That can all interfere with your thought process and your decision making. So one member of the team is tasked with getting out the checklist and appealing to the collective wisdom, the inherited wisdom from generations of test pilots and prior tragedies, and look up in the quick reference handbook, loss of thrust on both engines, and start going through that checklist. So there's a division of labor. There's the co-pilot going through the restart the engines checklist, and there's the pilot flying the plane. So I want to point out the statistic that there are 10 million flights a year in the United States. This is commercial. Commercial of all shapes and sizes, but commercial airlines, about 10 million flights a year. And on average, when you look over the years, there's been 36 accidents. This includes damage and injury without fatality, but overall, 36 accidents. So that's a pretty incredible safety record. But the whole industry is set up with enormous infrastructure to improve on that safety record. That's the mindset in aviation. And this is a 99.99964% safety record. And they're always looking for how do we get a few more nines in this performance. And I just want to draw the parallel to your life on campus. USA Today did a study a few years ago where they looked at the alcohol-related deaths that were really happened in school session and on campus and were really attributable to campus activities. And they found, okay, there's 12 million college students and on average 36 alcohol-related deaths. Those are the same numbers as the aviation industry. So by and large, it's an incredibly safe environment. And what I'm trying to appeal to you here is to say, as professionals, as officers, take that charge from the aviation industry to say we are all about 99.9999% safety. And how do we get there? Because any of these deaths is a tragedy. So I hope that this is an inspirational way of saying to you, we are all pilots. And I hope you will use your checklists. And when I say checklists, I mean literally the checklists you have, and also all the resources that Jim was pointing to earlier on campus. And I did ask you the question, and I'm not going to go through this to scold anybody, but I asked you all in the survey, so how many of you have read the Fiji Risk Management Policy? This is a document that was put together by the insurance industry, collaboratively with the fraternities, to say, just as in aviation, we're going to take the collective wisdom of all the test pilots and tragic incidents that came before, and we're going to boil them down to some lessons that can prevent this kind of thing. And so only 11% had read all of this, admittedly, 100-page document. Now things get a little better with the chapter officer's manual, but still only a third have read all of the chapter's officer's manual. So the point I want to make here is that these documents, that's just the tip of the iceberg. It's probably even more important that you have human resources available to counsel you. But these documents should be on your smartphone. They should be bookmarked on your browser. And when you get into an emergency situation or a crisis, the first thing you want to do is go to the document. I asked you all what kinds of decisions are really kind of contentious decisions and problematic situations. And you all know this: alcohol, discipline, drugs, the GPA issue, hazing, housing. All of these issues can come up. And what I'm trying to say is that ultimately you need to be able to recognize when there is a decision or a situation that is covered by policy. And I think you need to have the vocabulary to say, I am an officer of this fraternity, and I have a fiduciary responsibility. And if a brother brings to you a problematic situation, you're going to say to them, I'm not just going to wing it here. This matter is covered by policy. We're going to follow policy. I'm going to go find out what that is and get back to you. So it should be a source of strength. And in Silicon Valley, where I work in San Francisco, and it's the high-tech, empire there in Silicon Valley, there's an expression, RTFM. This is the response that engineers give when clueless tech users ask them what the engineers consider a stupid question about how to use a software product. And it's RTFM is read the freaking manual, except they don't say freaking. And really the lesson here is don't overthink it. If people bring to you a dilemma that is covered by policy, we go back to that first question I wanted you to ask, what is my duty? Your duty is to know the policy and apply it. So that covers the kind of first major question that I would like you to ask as leaders, as courageous leaders. That was the question of what is my duty in a certain situation. And then there's also, once you've followed a policy, or if you're in a situation that is not covered by policy, there could be discretionary decisions. So these are kind of gray area decisions. And this leads us to the second question that you can ask as a courageous leader. And that is, you get into what are the pros and cons, and doing that in a deliberative fashion. So I want to share with you a model, a checklist for, once you're past the policy issues, for understanding how to evaluate the pros and cons. And it's called Scoped.